Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to register and attend. We're looking forward to the session. Hope you all are as well. It is, of course, being recorded, so we'll send out the recording to folks after the session. Many of you already noticed or were familiar. To begin with, there is a Q&A function here, and so we would encourage you to share all manner of question, comment, concern. We will, depending on time, make our way to those at the end of the session. And if we don't have that opportunity in the live kind of formal session here, we promise we will get back to folks individually or kind of collectively, depending on the question. Let me take a brief moment to introduce my colleagues and co-presenters. We've got Stacy Gaitis, the Director of Direct Marketing from Atlanta Humane Society, and Angela Nodurft, Director, Client Strategy and Success from One and All. Both are valuable partners for DB Canvas and DB Calling, where I, Kevin Schulman, hail from. We're gonna, just by way of very brief outline here, Angela is gonna get us started with setting the stage and making, I would argue, a compelling case for sustainer acquisition and especially multi-channel sustainer acquisition. So that will be our appetizer course. Stacy is going to be, I think, probably you'll decide at the end of all of this, the main event in sharing sort of fireside chat style the story of Atlanta Humane Society and their decision to get into sustainer acquisition in a more robust kind of multi-channel way. And so we're looking forward to that. And then I will bring up the rear to address this notion of behavioral science and what the heck that means, both in theory, but also specifically and applied to sustainers for how we think you can improve both the acquisition and the retention of these folks. So without further ado, let me pass it off to Stacy. Oh, I'm sorry, Angela.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and hello, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. And I know, most of you, if you're on this webinar, you understand the value of a monthly giving program. You understand why it's an important revenue stream for an organization. But I also know that many of you are not going to be the only person that gets to decide how to control the purse strings in your organization. So I'm going to talk us through a few of the arguments for why organizations should be investing in growing their monthly giving program. And like Kevin said, the value of multi-channel investment rather than single channel investment. So first, let's talk through 4 really good reasons why you should make that investment. The first one is that the average recurring donor gives 42% more in a year than the average single gift donor. Now, as you can imagine, that adds up over time to about 400% over the course of 5 years. That's a pretty significant return for organizations as you do the math and realize just how much a sustainer can give to you once they are signed up for that reoccurring donation. So new donor retention rates on average, I'm sure, again, many of us know that it can be a challenge to retain a new donor. Retention rates can be as low as 23% for an organization. But if you can get those new donors converted into a monthly giving program, it is a completely different world. Typically, in the first year, organizations reach about 80% retention and as high as 95% after 5 years. And then the fourth reason, less science-based, but more heart-based, which, as we know as fundraisers, sometimes really makes the difference, is that the world is very different than it was at this time last year. And we know that many Americans have been hit hard by the pandemic and everything that happened in 2020, and maybe don't have the capacity to give. But we know that those who do have the capacity to give have been very eager to help when able. And so donors with the means to give, this is a really great time to be offering them opportunities to help in a sustained way. And so I know I promised 4 reasons, but I do have a bit of a cheat here and have a 5th reason why you should give. So first of all, One and All conducts a study every year called Donor Graphics, where we survey active US donors. We found in the most recent data set that was run in November 2020, so post start of the pandemic, that 32% of US donors give monthly to at least one organization. But those numbers are much higher for younger donors. You can see here on the slide that now these are of donors who are active donors. So we know, of course, there are much fewer Gen Z donors than there are boomers or seniors, but still of Gen Z active donors, 48.7% of them are giving monthly to at least one organization, and 45% of millennials are doing the same. With this subscription culture that we have built for ourselves as a society, younger generations have really locked into the mechanisms of subscribing monthly, paying for something monthly, and donating monthly. So if you have an organization that is hungry for ways to involve younger donors in your organization, sustained giving is a great way to do that. So I've talked through some statistics on why you should invest. I wanted to share just one case study for an organization that took that leap and what it looked like for them. So this is not Stacy. This is an anonymous case study of an organization who decided to invest in multi-channel sustainer acquisition. They knew that they wanted to improve the long-term sustainability of their organization, and they knew that at the current time they were really relying on things that a lot of organizations rely on, like planned gifts that cannot necessarily be counted on at the same rate every year. And so they decided to put investment in a multi-channel sustainer program. And that took the form of a few different mechanisms. They invested in canvassing. They invested in digital conversion, both of their current donors and their warm prospects on their file. They also utilized telemarketing to acquire new sustainers. And they coupled that with a really important piece of all of this, which is investing in keeping those sustainers on your file. So they put a focus on building a stewardship program for their existing sustainers, and also put in a pre-lapse strategy to be able to capture sustainers with a credit card on file that was about to expire. They found, in this particular case, a really wonderful, loyal, highly trained donor who was trained to make live calls every month to sustainers that were about to lapse on their credit card. And with all of that investment across 2 years, this particular organization grew their sustainer audience by 170%. This was certainly, leaps and bounds growth for this organization. And mind you, these 2-year period is during 2020. This is inclusive of the pandemic. Comparatively, looking at organizations that are in the same mission area as this organization is, who invested in single channel sustainer growth, saw 32% growth over 2 years. So still a really great, respectable growth, but certainly no 170%. So this is just one example of why investing in multiple channels to grow your sustainer file makes a whole lot of sense for organizations. Again, this case study was not Atlanta Humane Society, but I know next I'm going to turn things over to Stacy at Atlanta Humane to talk about her experiences and the great success that they've experienced. So take it away, Stacy.
Great, thank you, Angie. That was great information. So thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate it. Hope you enjoy and get a lot out of it. Like any good direct marketer, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's our sustainer story. And like all good stories, it starts with once upon a time. And so once upon a time, back in 2015, we had about 250 monthly donors. And we wanted to grow that. Our goal was to grow that. So we started with digital, with email campaigns and telemarketing campaigns to upgrade our current donors. We did a match with that, and we matched their first 6 months gift, and it worked great. And we doubled our number of sustainers very rapidly. So then we heard about face-to-face, and it was back in 2017. And we decided to try that, and we got the board and everyone on board with committing to it, and we did that. So we were on the streets of Atlanta in the very high traffic areas during the day. And it worked really well. We added substantially to our sustainer base. It was a good program. We considered it a success, and it got us down the road. We did it for 6 months. But we didn't know what we didn't know. We learned a lot. It educated us quite a bit, and told us some things that we needed to do before we went to the next level. So some of those issues that we saw were, the first thing, we were on the street. So we were, walking up to people, just randomly approaching them, and we got complaints about that. The next thing that we learned that was critical, we needed a credit card updater. So even though there's a built-in system within Luminant, which is our platform, and people get a lapsed they get the lapsed emails before their credit card lapse, and they get them once a month for a year after their credit card lapses. If you can get their new credit card in there before it lapses, you're much better, or if you don't have to contact them to update it. So that was the second critical thing. And the third thing was that we found it would be so much more palatable if we had a second gift guarantee with the program. And that means that we would not pay the agency for the monthly donor until after they had made their second gift. So we did that for 6 months, and then we stopped and took stock. And then a year later, we looked at the numbers and the 5-year projections, as Angela was talking about. The face-to-face or door-to-door monthly donors, the return would be so much greater than direct mail acquired one-time donors. So then our question, well, how do we fund this? So we decided to, Angela's going to shoot me, but we decided to convert some of our direct mail acquisition budget to door-to-door and just see how it worked. And then we also divided the spend over 2 fiscal years so that it was much easier for our finance team to stomach that way. So we started up with DV Canvas in late fall of 2019. We did the permitting required, we did the scripting, we did the collateral, we got everything set up within a couple of months. And we were at the door by February 2020. We were at people's doors in Atlanta, and it worked great. And we were so excited for about 3 weeks. And then COVID hit, and we shut down everything. So then a couple of weeks later, we were approached by a new canvassing experience who we already knew, another agency, and they had already converted their door people or their street people to telemarketing and had the system set up. So they said, why don't we try cold calling acquisition files with our trained door-to-door telemarketers, canvassers. So we tried that, and it worked great. People were home and they were isolated, and they were so happy to talk to someone on the phone about their pets. So it was really phenomenal. And then DV Canvas contacted us a couple of weeks later, and they said, hey, we're getting our telemarketing set up, our telecanvassing. You want to do it? And we're like, yes, we want to do that. Sign us up. So we started with DV Canvas with our donors, our current and our lapsed donors, converting them to sustainers. And that worked great. So we went on with that for a while, for a couple of months, and then we started running out of donors. So DV Canvas suggested, well, why don't we try your adopters? And we were pretty hesitant because we said, we've tried mailing to adopters and they just don't work that well, but let's try it and see what happens. So we did, and guess what? It worked great. So we were just really thrilled and pumped. So we're doing that, and then we get to August, and things started opening up a little bit with COVID. So they said, hey, let's try going back door to door. So we did. And it worked great. We just weren't sure what the reception would be and how people would feel about people coming into their homes with COVID. We only had one issue at all that I can remember, and that was one of the canvassers was walking down the street without their mask on, and someone saw them and mentioned it in a next door comment. Besides that we've had not one issue at all. So it's worked really well even in this environment. But we still had some of the telecanvassers who were not comfortable going back door to door. And that was working great. So we kept continuing to do the telecanvassing on the phone and the door to door. And that's what we're doing to date. So we're about 40% of our sustainers have come door to door, and about 60% have come through telemarketing through that program. So my learnings from this, I have, I think about 14 or 15. And if you would like me to send these to you afterwards, just put a thing in the chat and I'll be happy to send them to you. The first thing, don't use the word sustainer. That is an industry term. Donors don't understand that. Use the word monthly. They get monthly. We've had several people who said, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for a monthly gift. We were using the term sustainer, so don't use that word. We tweaked the script and now it's working great. We're getting nobody canceling for that reason. My second thing is I mentioned a second gift guarantee. That's very important. The third thing, the credit card updater is absolutely critical to the program. That still only catches probably 80 to 90% of new credit cards. And you still have to do some manual outreach, but it's a huge, huge help. I would not attempt this without it. The fourth thing, make sure that your canvassers and the agency are on board, that there are no limits to the length of the monthly donation. It's not for a 12-month donation. They're not signing up for a 24-month donation. It's an ongoing donation until the donor cancels. We've had some other issues with that. So just make sure that they're on board with that in the script. The fifth thing you need to know, it's a very high maintenance program. Constantly on the phone and emailing donors, which is a pleasure. It's a total pleasure because, as you know, they love to talk about their puppies and kittens, but it is very high maintenance with donors, and it's high maintenance with the agency, constantly tweaking things, looking at things. It's a very robust and dynamic program, which is great. The sixth thing, the canvassers, you have to keep them invested in the cause. The canvassers are like the best ambassadors for us you can imagine out there. They are so enthusiastic. I just love them. They are so passionate about our cause. It's fantastic, but you need to keep them up. They get a lot of no's out there. So you need to cheerlead for them. When it was possible, I would go into their sales meetings about every 6 weeks to 8 weeks and do some cheerleading and bring some puppies and kittens. And so in this environment, we've shared videos of our mission and things just to keep them invested and up with it. And they love that. Let's see, the next thing, keep signups from donors who are out of your geography to a minimum. On the street, it was a bigger issue door to door. It's still an issue though. We're good with Atlanta. We're good with Georgia. We have donors from outside the state and they want to donate. And some of them are long term, but if somebody is going to cancel, that's who it's going to be, is someone who is outside of your geography. You need to address complaints like within hours. This is a very visual, social, out there program. You will get comments on Nextdoor. You will get people calling in, writing in, sending, from the mailbox. Address those complaints like immediately. That being said, on the other hand, we get so many compliments about the canvassers. I would say the compliments to the complaints are like 20 to 1, but you do need to get those complaints early. The next thing, put it on the web, publicize it, let everybody know that this is a legit program. I had 2 calls from one donor before 7 o'clock this morning, making sure their donation from last night was good. Put it on your website, make sure your call center knows about it, your staff, your volunteers, make sure it's out there. Everybody knows that you are out there on the street doing it, and it's you, and it is legitimate. A match is great. We have had great success matching the first 3 months gifts. But if you do that, make sure that the donors understand and the canvassers know to convey that even though their first 3 months gifts might be matched, they are not signing up for 3 gifts. They're signing up for an endless number of gifts, but only their first 3 will be matched as part of a special program. Let's see, weekly reconciliation, the reporting, it's just a bugaboo. We've done it with an API with integrated programs, and our current setup, the donations are coming in straight to our Luminant forms. There's still a lot of reconciliation that's necessary, so just be prepared for that. Allow donors to make one-time gifts. This is a little bit at odds with the structure of door-to-door because canvassers are paid based on the monthly donors they sign up, so that's their natural inclination. But donors don't understand if they want to support you, and some of them just don't want to support you. Even though the canvassers are awesome salespeople, they do not want to support you with a monthly gift, and they get very upset if they're not allowed to give a one-time gift. So make sure that as a last resort, they are allowed to give a one-time gift. The other thing, we do have forms set up so that if a donor says, I'm not ready right now, I want to check you out, and then I'll go online and make it, they rarely do. We have a form set up that the canvassers give them. That rarely ever happens. So just something to know. If you are on the straight, if you do face-to-face, not door-to-door, change your team locations constantly, because if not, they're hitting up the same people all the time, and you will get so many complaints from those people. Last couple of things, integrate it with all of your other efforts, all your other communications and fundraising. We have our Day of Giving coming up this month or early next month. And we will be integrating with that and offering the t-shirts to donors who donate a certain amount, our Day of Giving t-shirts. Integrate it with your matches, and that's a great way to create excitement and increase gifts. And with the direct mail, we integrate it with all our direct mail themes and issues and things that are going on. So just make sure that your door-to-door donors are integrated with your core mission as well. And last but not least, as Angela kind of talked about, once you get all these wonderful new sustainers, you have got to cultivate and steward them. It's critical, or else, all of that was just for nothing. So have a plan before you start the program, before you sign up, because once you start it, those monthly donors are going to be flooding in. And so have a plan for stewardship immediately. I've got a plan that I've developed by fire. So if anyone would like a copy of that, I'm happy to share. Just put it in the chat box and I'll be happy to send you a copy. So that's the story. And it does have a happy ending, I will say. The stats that I know everybody's looking for are break even on this. And this was figured just this week. Our break even on the program is at 20.5 months, which is pretty good. We're happy about that. Our retention rate is 91%, and that we started exactly a year ago this month, so that's 91%. Of the balance, we have 5% that were actual cancels, and 4% are lapsed credit cards that have not been caught or updated by the credit card updater service. So the other part of the happy ending is that we have gone from 250 to 2,500 monthly donors. But I will say that's not really a happy ending, because that's a happy ongoing, because we're still going at it. So that's it. That's all I got. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you for that. So we've had appetizer. That was definitely the entree. I hope you saved a little bit of room for dessert. I can see that the questions and requests for some of that material that Stacy mentioned have been flying in fast and furious. So we'll be sure to accommodate that after the session. All right. So there's a bit of 101 that I thought might be useful considerations, and Stacy hit on a few of these already, so I won't belabor it. We've elected to do the 101 around canvassing, and on the assumption that might be wrong, that folks are probably less familiar with canvassing than with telemarketing or telefundraising. So I'm going to hit on a few 101s here. There is a 101 or a set of considerations that we would argue also make sense or are necessary in the telefundraising space. And similar to Stacy's comment, if you want the considerations that we would argue you ought to pay attention to for telefundraising, just make a note of that in the Q&A. I think the Q&A actually may be the better place than the chat to request any of these bits and pieces after the session. I know for certain we get that as a stored request. One of the first considerations, and Stacy already talked about their kind of lived experience, you need to decide if you're going to turn left or right. Are you going to do door? Are you going to do street? The data on this is pretty clear. There is a pretty sizable gap in the 13-month retention if you're running a street program versus door. Street is just what Stacy described. They're on the busy intersections in downtown Atlanta, typically somewhere that's got high traffic, and door is residential. You're going to households. There's some other options with retail spaces, sort of public spaces, but door versus street is sort of the initial consideration. Again, the retention data is clear. This is sourced from Target Analytics. I know folks will point out that these are averages, and you can do a lot better than 33% in the street. This is year one retention, and I agree you can, but this is the average. And if you can do better than 33 in the street, you can also do better than 55 on the door. So regardless, the gap exists, and it is sizable. The other, we've clearly got a bias here towards door, but I'm just underscoring the reasons for it and what you ought to at least consider in making that choice. Door has another inherent kind of advantage over street that you simply can't replicate with the street-based work, and that's the ability to make use of data, both organizational data and third-party data. Organizational data is that we can take Stacy's donor file and her adopter file and her volunteer file and load that into the recruitment software. This applies for canvassing or telemarketing. A lot of these comments, in fact, do. So with telefundraising or with canvassing, you load that organizational data into the system. And if I'm knocking on doors, you can imagine I'm starting off in a really bad place if the person behind that door who elects to answer has some existing relationship with Atlanta Humane. They're an adopter or a volunteer or both, or they're a current or past donor. Having that information is, I would argue, mission critical to establishing a rapport and not alienating this person who's already got some connection to the organization. Additionally, there are reams and reams of third-party data. That is all that data that's available for purchase. It's cheap, it's commoditized, and you can have it for all your records. And one of the things that you can do with third-party data and with door-based work is build a model. And I can improve the efficiency of that door outreach, which is going to do nothing but benefit us as an organization and our end clients. And I can, for example, identify the bottom 10% of residential doors that I should probably avoid because based on all this third-party data, they look a lot like the other doors that I've knocked on that said no. On the flip side, I can prioritize the top 10% of doors that behind that door and vis-a-vis the third-party data, they look a lot like the folks who have said yes. And I want to redouble my effort and make sure that when I'm canvassing that particular neighborhood, that I work hard to have a conversation with those folks. Payment method is something else that you'll want to consider. Stacy made the point, and we would wholeheartedly agree. When you're taking credit card, and you're going to have to, you need that automated credit card updater. A lot of these systems provide it. It's pretty much table stakes these days, but if you don't know to ask, then you'll miss a beat there. But another significant payment method is EFT, and the lifetime value for the exact same human being who cloned themselves and they signed up at two separate instances, but otherwise they're identical. If person A signs up with EFT and that same person signs up with Visa, the first person's worth about twice as much in lifetime value, strictly tied to payment method. And even with the credit card updater, as Stacy mentioned, there's some loss in there that you just can't avoid. and you all have lived this, your visas get replaced seemingly every week. And with EFT, it's just a much stickier payment method. That has nothing to do with the experience that you've created or their connection to the cause. It's kind of an operational bit. And you're able to get a much higher EFT rate at the door over street, and that's, again, kind of an built-in advantage for that door operation. But it kind of begs the question, the industry overall, the sector, the vast majority of spend and donors who are required are still acquired in the street. And there's got to be some answer behind that. We would stipulate that the answer is because quantity is sort of the altar that we as a sector tend to worship. It is the metric that is primarily, if not exclusively, focused on. And by quantity, I mean the number of signups. And it is true that if you have a canvasser who works and does a shift in the street, and that same canvasser does a shift on the door, they can often get more signups. It's not drastically more on the street versus the door. Now, that's not because the conversion rate is higher. It often isn't. It's just because they have more conversations in a given shift with street. And so if you are singularly focused on quantity or heavily oriented towards quantity, that's the choice that you're going to make. Now, we would argue that there's part of the corollary there is that there's this kind of false choice of having to decide between quality or quantity. And if you are kind of stuck with that false choice, it's easy to see why quantity can kind of rule the day. It's very simple. It's counting. It's easy to have and not mess up, and everyone's really clear on the front end and the back end on how many folks signed up and how many folks have quit. And I would argue that part of the problem here is that quality is, we've got as a sector overall a pretty superficial, kind of surface deep understanding of what quality is. Oftentimes we reduce quality down to the age of the human being. And it is a fact that younger people who are signed up for these sustaining kind of regular gifts, monthly donations, do quit at a higher rate than older people. That's undeniable. It's equally true that you do have some older people who quit and you have some younger people who stick around. And that extra fact argues that we need to dig a little bit deeper than age in understanding human motivation and what's causing somebody to give and continue to give. And so really the balance of this session and this whole idea of applying behavioral science to your sustainer program is about turning that or to an and, the idea that you can have quality and quantity, but the only way to get there is digging a bit deeper on the understanding around quality. Quality is not a born trait. We don't have human beings who are just born good donors and they'll just age like a fine wine into that quality status. But oftentimes that's kind of how we tend to operate. So a little bit of theory here, and then I promise we'll have lots of applied. When we think about motivation, if someone is going to sign up for that monthly gift, they've got to have motivation in the moment to do it. But they also have to have motivation to continue that regular giving. And motivation is often thought of as being a quantity thing, meaning I've got a little or a lot of motivation, and that if they are more motivated, they've got more motivation, that's what will win the day. And while the quantity of motivation is a real thing, more importantly is the quality of the motivation. And the other important ingredient here is that this quality of motivation is entirely under our control. 100%. People are not born with high quality motivation to give to Atlanta Humane Society. We can breed and foster an interaction and an experience that engenders a high quality feeling motivation. High quality motivation, sometimes it's wonkily called intrinsic motivation. This is the kind of motivation that comes from the inside. It's where your support of that organization is a way to express yourself. It's a way to reveal your values and your goals. It's a way to express your purpose and your passion, to actually have growth as a part of that support for the organization. If it's fueled from the inside, this intrinsic motivation, they'll give in the first instance, and they will continue giving. And this is going to be a very valuable, profitable donor, but they're going to be valuable and profitable because they are deriving an enormous amount of psychological benefit from giving to the organization. On the other end, you've got what we would call extrinsic motivation, and this is all outward pressure. That's what's causing you, or outside forces that are creating a certain level of motivation. And it turns out to be pretty low quality motivation. The real obvious kind of external motivation is guilt-inducing appeals, or that guilt-inducing or pressurized canvassing interaction or telemarketing interaction. That seems really obvious to us, that yes, you could probably get somebody to say yes in the moment, but the first chance they get, they're going to quit. The less obvious kind of external motivation is this kind of fleeting moment of excitement or a little bit of satisfaction. This also happens a lot with human interaction, so canvassing or telefundraising, telemarketing, where the person on the other end making the pitch is super passionate and motivated. Stacey mentioned that most of the vast majority of the comments that she receives from these donors is positive. It's talking about the good interaction they had, talking about how passionate and informed and satisfying it was to interact with this human being and sign up. And that can create this sort of false sense of quality motivation. If that's all it is, then you can imagine once that person's gone and the excitement's gone, you've got that potential for buyer's remorse. This is a real quote, comment, feedback from a donor. This is not Stacey's donors. This is another organization, but this was shared by someone who signed up. And this person, we're going to call her Jane the donor. I don't recall her actual name, and I wouldn't share it anyway. So Jane the donor offered up this comment, and it does a better job, a more succinct job than I could ever do. Remember, this is right after she signed up. And I know it's a she, and this was a canvassing interaction, but you can imagine the exact same thing happening after a telefundraising interaction. Ashley, which is the name of the canvasser in this case, Ashley's constant flow of positivity didn't leave any room for me to say no. Before I knew it, I was entering credit card info. That's effective for a short-term donation, so maybe that's the best place to start, but it doesn't create a sustained commitment, the same way that connecting about, for instance, clean water might. This is a conservation group. I was told why I should care, e.g. as in the New Yorker, sharing a water source that will run out down the line, rather than being connected with my own reasons why I really do care. Okay? This is a person who is at risk of quitting, not because they don't have the potential to have some real intrinsic motivation, to have some real internal fire around the decision to support, but they're at risk of quitting because that fire wasn't lit. In fact, it was snuffed out partially, and not because Ashley was pushy or guilt-inducing. It was because she was super positive and energetic and passionate about the thing that she cared about, or the thing that she was trained on. And she didn't let the conversation start where it more naturally might start if you were talking to a stranger. You might actually ask them about themselves and have them start to share that context. This idea of being connected to the mission, so the idea of saving cats and dogs and other animals, or the idea of helping people in need who are out of work and unable to, put meals on the table. There are lots of reasons why I might care about that mission, reasons that are important to me, that are part of my story. But if you don't give it a chance to more obviously allow me to connect my reasons for caring to your mission, and you force feed, even if it's very positive, the Scripps reason, you've you've really suppressed that opportunity. Let me show you an alternative approach. So this is snippets of a script. This was done as a test and control. So we had, and I argue that the problem with Ashley is not anything having to do with Ashley. It has to do with the training and the scripting, and the view that if our canvassers are just super positive and emotive and passionate, that's what we need to win the day. And I would argue that is not the case. So it goes back to scripting and training. And this is, again, just some screenshots and snippets from a script. But the opening bit here is really about trying to provide a sense of autonomy and kind of control and deliver that to this human being that we're having a conversation with. And there are psychological reasons why that's important. But, you know, in the sort of lay version of this, I want them to share a little bit about things that are germane to the sort of mission and topic at hand. Again, this is a conservation group. So you'll notice that some of these opening questions are getting them to share what our Jane the donor story didn't have a chance to share because she kind of got suffocated with all this positive passion around what Ashley cared about. And then there is need and opportunity, we would argue, to have a bit of structured capturing of that identity. And this is an example for this conservation group where we want to specifically prompt and ask about, when they think about conservation, do they tend to focus on animals in nature or future generations? Now, conversationally, I, as the canvasser or the telemarketer, am going to have the script change once I enter in that information. So if they say animals in nature, that's a very different pitch than if they say they're interested in preserving landscape for future generation. So the conversation in the moment changes based on what they've shared. Similarly, if we had given Jane the donor a chance to talk about her reasons for caring, you could have tailored the conversation accordingly. And then so we play that back, and that gets baked into the ask. And again, this was done as a test control, and the control was a script that is pretty traditional, and it's the kind that Ashley would have been trained on. And there were two outcomes here, well, actually three. There were two financial ones. We did increase the conversion rate. This is actually a better way to get people to say yes up front. We increased their donor value. That is not the reason we did it. That's a happy outcome. I would have been equally happy if there were no lift in those initial metrics. The real value here is that I now know something about this human being. And this information gets stored in the telefundraising or the canvassing software. So for the folks that Stacy signs up, we know if they're more of a dog person, a cat person, or all animals person. So that gets worked into conversation, whether it's canvassing or telefundraising. So this is about trying to find out what it is that is innate to this person. If I'm a dog person, I don't have to ever give to charity to kind of reinforce my values attached to being a dog person. I own 2 dogs. Do I need to give to a charity? You'd have to make a case for how my supporting Atlanta Humane, which, by the way, I do, I'm a monthly donor, how that support is reinforcing of my values and goals. And if you don't know that I'm a dog person and you don't know that I've got 2 dogs, and that the best way to do that is to get me to talk about my dogs, which I will do incessantly, then you've missed a trick. And Ashley may not have that opportunity if the training and the scripting aren't tied to that important psychology for why I'm likely to give, not in the moment, but to continue giving. Now, if you're a rescue mission, yeah, obviously you're not a dog or a cat person. The identity is, we have lots of identities, and those identities are always context specific. So my dog identity is not going to be activated if I'm talking to somebody who's representing a food bank or a rescue mission. But in the case of a food bank, if I'm a parent, which I am, that might be an identity that is germane, given that a lot of food bank work is aimed at helping children. And that's a way to create a connection for me. For a rescue mission, there are other sort of specialized questions that we would ask that tap into likely identities in that context. Okay, so this notion of identity matters. It can help with upfront conversion, and importantly, it is creating and fostering more of that quality motivation so that we've increased the chance that they stick around. Now, we can further reinforce the positive interaction that we had by taking advantage of the data that we've collected and continue as best we can in a non kind of human to human way with all the subsequent communications, continue that tailoring effort. So this is a different organization still in the animal space. In this case, we have some test data, so I wanted to share this. I knew if these folks were horse people or dog people, and so we did what makes sense. We sent a dog email to the dog people and a horse email to the horse people, but intentionally also did the mismatch. This is kind of the one size fits all, where we sent the dog email out to everybody. And you're seeing a lot of these sort of engagement metrics or kind of proxies for engagement really nosedived when I had this mismatch between who they were. And it all just makes intuitive sense that if I know something about you and the reason that you're supporting, and then I match the message to who you are, you're going to be a heck of a lot more interested. So this is one of the ways that you can, this cliche about retention starting at acquisition, I think it is categorically the case that retention does start at acquisition. But unless we sort of dig beneath the cliche and start to change the process, then it's just going to stay a cliche. All right, back to our friend Jane the donor. This is the same quote, and I want to call out another part of her comment because she does just a brilliant job of segueing and queuing up all the points that we wanted to make around this behavioral science. So she also uses the word commitment. We talked about identity. Identity, think about that as something that's innate to them. They'll always have it. I'm going to be a dog person, whether I give to you or not, whether you knock on my door or not. But my being a dog person is your chance to connect me to your mission, which is the starting point. I don't know anything about your brand or your organization necessarily, but if you can connect me to your mission by making it germane to who I am as a person. Commitment, as a contrast, is about that connection to the brand. And you absolutely want to build connection to the brand, and that's going to happen if we are fostering that high quality motivation and showing that supporting the organization is in keeping with who you are. And our Jane the donor here has just intuitively noted that there requires this sustained commitment to the organization if they're going to keep giving. And as it turns out, there's a way to measure this. We call it commitment as shorthand. You can think about this as their loyalty to the brand or their attitudinal kind of connection to the brands. Here's a screenshot. This are the magic 3 questions used to measure their commitment level to the organization. And you can see there's a 0 to 10 scale, and we roll that up to get to a commitment score. And the reason we do that is multifaceted, but not least of which because commitment turns out to be a very reliable, useful predictor for who's likely to stick around versus not. So here we're taking donors and we're just segmenting them based on their commitment level. These are all newly acquired folks and looking at their payment rate, their retention rate across those early key first few months of that new donor acquisition. Okay, so commitment has nothing to do with their behavior per se. It's about their connection to the brand. And it always gets asked, well, is the commitment for the new donor going to be less than the commitment for folks who have been giving for a while? Absolutely. As a matter of course, and sort of in keeping with this notion of relationship strength, relationships are not formed in a day. If I've been giving to Atlanta for Humane Society for 5 years, the commitment score for that group of donors on whole is going to be much higher than the commitment score for the people walking in the front door for the first time. Having said that, there is difference, there is spread or variance. There's a degree of commitment that does exist even within those newly acquired supporters. And knowing about that, again, has multifaceted benefit. All right, so we've talked about identity, we've talked about commitment, and now we're going to get to another key kind of ingredient here. And Stacy already made mention of hearing from supporters about the experience that they've had, and noting that fortunately the vast majority of experiences are positive, but when it's bad, it's really bad. So there is immediate need to unearth as many experience ratings as possible so that you can identify that 1 in 20 or the 1 in 10. It's going to be somewhere in that order of magnitude of folks who, for whatever reason, had a lousy experience, because it has a major impact on their likelihood to stick around. But as Stacey noted, if you've identified these folks and given them ample opportunity and made it easier for them to share this feedback, you're going to identify more people in that 1 in 20 category, and therefore have the opportunity to more immediately reach out and try to mitigate this bad experience. And oftentimes, just apologizing, thanking them for the fact that they took the time to give that feedback, making it abundantly clear, to state the obvious, that was not the intent, and we will absolutely get your feedback back to the folks that need to have access to it in order to fix the issue. That can really be worth its weight in gold in addressing this low satisfaction. Now, one of the evolutions that we've made as a business, and this is about our kind of taking our own medicine and digging deeper in the psychology of why and understanding this thing called motivation, is that we've evolved the way that we measure that satisfaction with the experience that they've had, whether it's with the canvasser or with the telefundraiser. And before, it was a pretty traditional kind of simple, tell us about that satisfaction, and then your standard kind of satisfaction scale, very satisfied, somewhat satisfied. And that has left us wanting. That was getting to sort of this binary place where they were either satisfied or not satisfied. And as a part of our own sort of advancement of these behavioral sciences, we've got a more refined understanding now of this thing called motivation. And specifically, we know that in those interactions that we're having with these human beings, whether it's telefundraising or canvassing, it doesn't matter, there are 3 kind of psychological needs that prospective donor, that other human being, is really, they need these things to be met if we're going to breed and foster that high quality intrinsic motivation. Autonomy is them feeling like at the end of that call or that face-to-face interaction that they have a sense of control, that it was their decision. That's the opposite of how I would feel if I felt like I got really guilted or pressurized into it. Relatedness, another key kind of psychological need that they're looking to have fulfilled as a part of these interactions, is a sense of connection and belonging. And you can imagine that if you're talking to me as a dog owner and getting me to share my dog story, and then with any luck, the canvasser is also a dog owner or a dog lover and is sharing their story, that is really going to be a great way to foster a sense of belonging, and telling me that Atlanta Humane is doing all this great work for dogs. Competence is wanting to have that human being feel as though they're going to make a difference, they're going to be effective with their 10, 15, 20, 25 bucks a month. There's other ways that you can breed a sense of competence. Maybe they want to learn and grow from this relationship at Atlanta Humane. Maybe they want to get a greater understanding of how the organization operates. So there are multiple ways that they can feel more competent and have that sense of growth or feeling an impact. But this is what we're trying to accomplish with these interactions. Yes, I want to sign up, but if I want to sign up that's going to stick around, I know I've got to deliver on these psychological needs. And the only way I'm going to know if we satisfy these needs is we've got to measure it. And so we have these specific measures, and you can see it's 2 for each of these concepts. And this gets sent out to everybody who signs up, whether it's telefundraising or canvassing. In fact, in the telefundraising world, because you've got oftentimes other contact details, this can get sent out for any of those warm conversations. This can get sent out with an email or an SMS. And there's multifaceted benefit from collecting this data. For those who share their feedback, and we're making it easy. We're gonna ask for this right after that interaction occurs, so it's sort of stays centered on their brain that this is something we're after, they're more likely to answer those questions, and we're going to be more likely to be able to turn around some sort of mitigation if we fell short. And while it's good to have human outreach with a donor service team or somebody in Stacy's team for some of those folks where we fell short on those delivering on those key needs, there's also a way to automate this and get some response back to these folks who've taken the time to give feedback. And so there's a long set of formulas and business rules, but the key point here is that for everybody who gives feedback, the next communication they get from the organization isn't some generic welcome email or some other stewardship piece number 2. It's tied specifically to the feedback they gave. And so if we fell short on any of those key needs, we have messaging that speaks to where we fell short. And so there's this involved matrix for all the different possible outcomes, but you wind up with this highly tailored, highly relevant communication that lets these folks know they've been heard. And this isn't just problem resolution. This is reinforcing some of the positives if we've delivered on these key needs. So this is about getting beyond that sort of one size fits all and being responsive to the feedback that they gave. All right, I see we are nearly up against time. This is a last bit that I think is important. I realize that means we'll probably won't have time for Q&A, but I do promise that we will get to that. I see we've got tons of questions and answers. I will collect with my colleagues after this with Angela and Stacy and make sure that they're all appropriately charged to give feedback where necessary on those Q&As. But the last bit that I wanted to really reinforce here, and this kind of ties it all in a bow in some ways, this idea of quality and how we need to dig deeper and get beyond just age. You can build a sustainer operation that is delivering on quantity and quality. It is possible. But even if you do everything really well, you're never going to have 100% retention. That's crazy. And wouldn't it be great if you could, with some high degree of confidence, know who is at risk of quitting in those first 90 days before it happens? Well, if you're collecting this extra data, this data that is got this theory and evidence behind it that's tied to kind of the motivation and why people do what they do, you can actually do that. We call it the true quality score, and it's a combination of factors. Some of them are listed on the screen there, but it's 20 some factors. Age is a part of the mix, but it's only one of about 20 different factors. And we can identify who's at risk in that first week, right after they've signed up, whether it's in the telefundraising world or in the canvassing world. And we have clients who are contacting that universe of donors that are at risk. And oftentimes it's with a phone call in week 2 or week 3. And that there's a very particular script for all of that. They have managed to cut their attrition in half by having this outreach to this audience who's at risk. I don't want to call everybody, that's a waste of time and money. But if I know they're at risk and I've got all these different data points about them, I can have a meaningful conversation. I can find out if in fact they're having second thoughts, and if it's something tied to amount. There's all the different ways that you can sort of dial that back or right size people based on the payment amount or the frequency and the terms. But it's a very good way to make use of this data kind of in aggregate. And last but not least, the only way that we're really going to have this sustainer acquisition world work in the U.S. is if we are running our programs, and this is pointed directly at all the agencies that are out there, and the clients should be demanding this. If the only metric that the agency is really working off of is quantity, and they are incenting their canvassers based on quantity, you're going to have a quantity operation. What you're seeing on the screen is this true quality score tied back to canvassers. Every single bar, all the little numeric values, their IDs, this represents individual canvassers. And this is for face-to-face. It's also for telefundraising. And I can see not only the quantity, the number of people they signed up in a given shift or a given week, but the quality of those people. And in this case, a tall bar is bad. The taller the bar, it means that of the people you signed up, that percentage are deemed to be at risk because the quality score is low. So I've got somebody over here, and let's imagine this is week 1. You're paying this agency you're not paying for signups. You're paying for people who sign up and stick around. If you pay for signups, you'll go broke. You need to pay for signups who stick around. This person is bringing in far more signups than everybody else because they're on the left over here, and almost everybody they sign up is at risk. Conversely, you got somebody over here in the middle, kind of fledgling on the quantity metric, who's probably below quota within that agency. They're probably going to get fired or they're going to quit because they're not going to bonus out. And this is a person who the vast majority of signups are solid, high quality folks who are going to stick around. And it takes agency and client working together, yes, but it takes agency and client working together with the right metrics to really get quality and quantity. I realize that we are now officially 2 minutes over. We appreciate all of the time. I want to thank my colleagues and co-presenters, Stacy and Angela, for their time and their willingness to be a part of the session. We've seen there's lots of questions and comments, and I promise we will get back to you in short order. But thank you again for signing up and for taking the time today.